This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
Namaskar, Sat Sri Akal, welcome and adab. You are listening to Bharat FM, a one of its kind, multilingual, eclectic provider of entertainment, information and news to Indian Americans. Headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio, Bharat FM airs shows out of Cincinnati, Chicago and Phoenix. We take pleasure in our ability to cater to your bhakti, chusti, sfurti, shakti and masti needs with our audio and visual shows. Check out bharatfm.com for our online program schedule and archives. I'm sure the content will definitely tickle your senses. Tune in via the 24-hour web streaming on bharatfm.com or via the Bharat FM app. More information can be procured at 513-488-5070.
Namaskar, good evening, good morning. Happy Independence Day to all the listeners and viewers of Storytellers Cafe. Welcome to this special Independence Day edition of Storytellers Cafe. I'm your host, Usha Venkatraman from Mumbai, India. Today, India celebrates or has completed 74 years after gaining independence in 1947. So here's wishing every Indian a very happy Independence Day. Today we have a special guest. Our guest across the seas and oceans and mountains from the other side of the world, from San Francisco, United States. So this is a special whammy for all the listeners in Cincinnati, Phoenix, and Chicago. Our guest tonight is from the beautiful city of San Francisco. Let me bring my guest onto the screen. Meet Asha Bajaj, my guest tonight. Namaste, Asha. Welcome to Storytellers Cafe.
Namaste, Usha. It's such a pleasure to be here and participating in the whole Indian diaspora on this special day.
Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing Asha. So, ladies and gentlemen, for the next 45 minutes, sit back, enjoy. Have your morning sip of coffee or tea because I know it's early morning in San Francisco, 8:30 a.m. Just sit back and listen to Asha weave her wonderful stories. And as we get into conversations and expressions with Asha Bajaj. Asha Bajaj is our guest tonight. We are very proud. Storytellers Cafe is proud to feature Dr. Asha Bajaj, physical therapist turned accidental storyteller. In fact, her profile is like a story itself. You will, agree with me as I read and introduce Asha. Asha Bajaj is a physical therapist and has over 30 years' experience in a variety of settings, including the management and operation of an outpatient private practice in Walnut Creek, California, from 1985 to 2004. Asha has served in Bhutan, India, Vietnam, and Malawi, Africa, with health volunteers overseas to train and develop their physical therapy program. From 2006 to 2013, Asha was involved with acute care in a hospital setting and an outpatient clinic as a locum therapist. Asha also has a special interest in women's health and did her doctoral project in the area of bone health and osteoporosis. She has been involved with a monthly health education series at the Afghan Elderly Association in Fremont and a health series with the Town of Danville. The year was 2006, and Asha had just returned from a sabbatical, having spent 4 months with health volunteers overseas in Bhutan. Asha sold her physical therapy practice of 20 years and was ready to write the next chapter of her life. Just by chance, Asha was at the Asian Art Museum at their Tibet exhibit and had been introduced to their style of Buddhist practice in Bhutan, the Vajrayana Buddhism. Asha's interest was piqued, and the rest, as they say, is history. Little did Asha know how well she would get hooked and has been a storyteller for the last 15 years. Bravo, Asha. Asha underwent a rigorous training for 1 year at the Asian Arts Museum, San Francisco, that involved both content and the style of storytelling. Today, you will have the pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to listen to Asha on Storytellers Cafe as she gives you a taste of just such a museum tour with a story from the beautiful country of Korea. And she will reveal the title of her story as the evening unfolds or the morning unfolds for us. Asha Bajaj is presently actively involved in the community with women's education and legal advocacy and serves as the president of the local branch in Danville for the American Association of University Women. Her current interests include storytelling at the Asian Arts Museum, playing tennis and internet Scrabble, reading and hiking, and spending time with her grandkids and taking care of her senior mother. Professional interests include abstract reviewer and con ed reviewer for CPTA and writing a monthly column for her neighborhood magazine. We will let Asha explain to us what abstract reviewer and con ed reviewer means. Asha believes that it is important to lead a healthy lifestyle and
Yes,
educating
it's
and
funny.
helping people make the right choices with regards to
There we are.
diet, exercise, and stress reduction are her main goals. Sorry, Asha, I was just completing your wonderful introduction. And if you can just enlighten us as to what is the reviewer, you
Yes,
know?
yes. So it's funny you read it as the con ed. I felt like I was doing a con job. It's actually continuing education series.
Sorry.
No problem. I think it's kind of funny. It's a nice title for a story, I think. So, anybody who's planning a course on a professional level sends it to the review committee. And one of the advantages of being at the other end of my career is that I'm still involved with the profession and can engage my brain in that way to see if it's relevant, if it meets all the quantitative standards of what a course should be able to do. So that's what it is. And abstract, I'll make it concrete for you. Any scientific paper has a little synopsis on the top, which is called the abstract, which kind of gives you an idea of what it's about, what the materials and methods are. So it's just a scientific methodology, and that's what you review to see if this paper should go to conference or not. I'm in the process of doing some of that right now, and I thoroughly enjoyed. That's in one compartment of my brain, and the other compartment, of course, is always looking for stories and having fun. Doing programs like these.
Right. You do know that, mathematical geniuses or scientists are very creative, and become wonderful storytellers or musicians,
That's
so
correct.
artists. So there's no mystery there that you have turned out to be a wonderful storyteller, Asha. Just tell us How did this transformation take place from a therapist, from a doctor practicing to an accidental storyteller? I think it was just fate.
Well, that was my tryst with destiny. I can't get over being Independence Day, remembering that famous speech of Nehruji, because we grew up. I was born in 1950, and that was the time where, you were watching Mr. Nehru in action. And I do respect him a lot because he gave a pragmatic view to the philosophic underpinnings of Mahatma Gandhi's message, which was great. It taught us to speak truth to power. His experiments with truth were a great moral authority for many of us, and gave us the chutzpah, as they call it here, or the confidence to speak truth to power, to fight for what's right. And it was scientifically proven, not only in India, but Martin Luther King did it here in America. I hadn't realized till I came to this country that he had gone back to learn these techniques. And you'll often see Civil War times in the 60s where they're wearing the Gandhi Nehru cap and fighting for freedom. And then, of course, Nelson Mandela. So here was an idea that was scientifically proven. It was just not anecdotal. So it really appeals to a lot of us who have a scientific bent, but we also have the philosophical underpinnings that come from India. So I've really been grateful to have been born in a spiritual heritage like this, and then to arrive in America where you could really be a karma yogi. You didn't, it was a merit-based society. And I loved being able to practice my profession and explore my potential, whether it's in the arts, in the sciences. The opportunity and the freedom was there. So, having the syncretic nature of Hinduism, you could be a Sati Savitri at home and you could be a Kali and Durga at work. And there was no conflict. It was easy to switch hats, to switch roles. And I think that was the biggest gift that we got from India. And the one thing I wanted to mention is the sense of detachment, the idea of pursuing your goals without worrying about the results and being present, just being present. In fact, I'm reading a wonderful book by Bruce Lee. It says, be like water. Water takes the shape of the tumbler when it's there. It becomes what it is. And I think that's where we have to learn. So when I'm a storyteller, I'm a storyteller. When I'm a therapist, I'm a therapist. But don't forget, even as a therapist, you're pretty much a cheerleader. You're motivating people to make changes in their life, and you're listening to their stories. Every single patient that walks in has a story and a lesson for you. So I think we have been storytellers all our lives. It just so happens that I was introduced to the Asian Art Museum, and I'm so thankful for that. And the reason I went into it is because they were doing a school program. So the children of San Francisco were brought to the museum, and here were all these kids. And what a great opportunity to share with them and dispel their myths about India. Because don't forget, when we came to this country 50 years ago, the only messages from India were snake charmers and poverty and PL 480 grain being sent to India, and the hippies, Ravi Shankar, Beatles, but drugs. So I think this was my opportunity to share a bit of our culture and engage the local people in looking at similarities. I think that's always been my hope, that every story I tell has a meta story, the big idea. And that's what I love about it. And I'm always impressed. There's a saying that says, everything you need to know, you learn in kindergarten. I mean, you can ask a little kid who's from second grade, and he will be able to tell you when you're talking about, well, what do you think is your dharma? And he'll say, well, to read and write. I said, well, what's the dharma of your teacher? To teach. And there's no conflict. Now, a couple of years ago, when I was starting at the museum, they were very particular that we don't bring these comments of dharma or religious connotations in. I still remember in my clinic calling yoga therapeutic exercise because it would go over better. without the idea of it being some kind of an ancient devil's practice and whatnot. Even the idea of multiple deities, to bring them to the thought that, look, we think of one source and these are just manifestations. And then we have the movie Avatar, and suddenly it's a common terminology. Every third grader knows what an avatar is. You can even have one on your telephone now. So it's been a great journey. I've really enjoyed it. It's a lot of learning and a lot of teaching, and a great way to share our wonderful heritage and learn from this culture and see both the similarities and the differences and rejoice in them. So that's been the story.
Absolutely. You put it so beautifully. In fact, you've encapsulated the Indian philosophy in your introductory speech, Asha. While I was listening to you, I said your profession was a therapist. You were a physical therapist, a doctor. And what is storytelling? It's also therapy. So
Yes.
I think there was no mystery that you gradually, blended beautifully into the world of stories, and, used it whether therapeutically or to teach and to talk about Indian culture. And as we were discussing before this interview, you did mention that you're a history buff.
Yes.
And working at the Asian Arts Museum must be so fulfilling, bringing history alive through stories. So, can you tell us a little bit about that? And
Yes, certainly. In fact, I have to share with the group, and I hope any of you who visit San Francisco will keep the Asian Art Museum on your itinerary. It's a beautiful building. It's the old San Francisco Library that has been converted into the museum. Previously, it was in the Golden Gate Park, so it was remote. So this is so much more accessible. It's right across City Hall, which is another beautiful example of classical architecture in our city. And when you get off BART, which is our electric train, this is like a reliving my days in Bombay of getting on the fast train to go to my giant college. It's really a fun thing to do. And then you walk through the United Nations Plaza. So you're walking in the footsteps of history. And there's Civic Center right in front of us, the seat of San Francisco, the seat of learning, the seat of liberalism. That's where Harvey Milk, the first gay rights representative, was unfortunately shot. Dianne Feinstein was then promoted to be mayor of the city. So we've been part of history here. And very often I have to remind people when they are looking at the museum artifacts that when they see the Gandhara Buddha with his mustache and the little knob between his eyebrows, that was happening. The stone carvings, the beautiful bronze Shiva we have. We had already discovered this while the West was in the Dark Ages at the time. So bringing that alive, that renaissance that occurred here was already happening. And unfortunately, because of historical currents or our own follies, I should say, of being separate and fighting, interfighting with each other, worked against us. But the basis of the culture was there, and to bring that alive. So oftentimes when I'm bringing the kids in, I will ask them as we go through the galleries with each region, can you tell me which of these sculpture is a Buddha? And what are the significant features that allow you to say that? And it's amazing. They can detect it all the time. Whether in Cambodia, he's got the pointy thing on top, but he's still got the big long ears. He's got the little dot in the middle, the knob, the urna. He's got the top head, and it brings the story alive. And I never tire of telling the story of Buddha. Oftentimes they think he's from China, he's from Japan. It's amazing to see that we haven't done as good a job of bringing our culture and our stories to the forefront. In fact, the most popular story of Star Wars could easily be the story of Ramayana, the victory of good over evil. Chewbacca was a big army of monkeys. So it's just amazing as my grandkids are now coming through. I just sat with Kabir, my little grandson, who's turning 8, and we were reading through the Mahabharata, and he can already see the similarities. And it's no joke or fun that for his party, guess what the souvenir was? They were key rings with Chewbacca and R2D2 and what have you. And we're talking about the Pushpak Vimana in our stories. So I think
Absolutely.
bringing that syncretic nature and still not being judgmental about this system or that system. I think there is a commonality in our humanity and our stories that crosses all barriers.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Asha. Thanks to storytellers like you, who are in the West and keep alive the Indian tradition and bring awareness to the Western civilization or the community about India. They already know. I mean, today, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita is. No mystery to them, they're all aware of it, and also the Indian pantheon of gods. But
Yes.
there are pockets who do not know about it, and you're doing a wonderful job at the Asian Art Museum. Thank you. And truly, I think it's a privilege to host you today on this Independence Day celebration uh, session on Storytellers Cafe, where we can proudly say that Indians have really gone miles far and, brought glory to their homeland. So, Asha, coming back to stories, as you know, the USP of Storytellers Cafe is to listen to stories. And I know that you have something wonderful where you're going to take us on a tour,
Yes.
on a virtual tour across the world.
I'd be happy to. So you might think, why Korea? It's a small little country. What's the big deal? So one of the best parts about going through the training is our museum is named after a Korean, the Chongmun Lee Museum.
Okay.
And Dr. Kim, who was our main curator, was the one who introduced us to the subtleties. And, just like the Indian diaspora or in Burma and other neighboring countries feels overshadowed by India and the Indo-Indic ideas, China has become the predominant culture you think of when you think of these countries. But Korea had discovered a special glaze, for example, in its pottery called celadon. It was a very light green color, beautiful. And so much so that the shogunates in Japan valued it so much that they would bring these artisans to their shogunates to make these beautiful things for them. And this is another thing you learn about Japanese culture. That's, I think, the epitome of high culture, I feel. They make everything you do into an artistic rendition. So we were in Japan a couple of years ago, and it's amazing. Everything is so beautifully presented. It's simplistic. It's done in a very uh, beautiful, nothing of the Byzantine goals and whatnot. Even their palaces are so simple. But guess what? They're the ones in Kanazawa who discovered gold plating. And you see these beautiful works that they bring out. So, anyway, today I want to take you to Korea. And if we'll please put up the slide, the theme of the
Sure.
stories is heroes and sheroes. So you are the school tour coming to our museum, and this is the Asian Art Museum. And we've been putting this up because there's been a backlash against Asian Americans after COVID. And we have these little agreements we ask the children to make. And here we are at the map. So if you bring your eye up to the right where this Buddha statue is, and come to the right, you see a celadon vase. This is one of the artifacts at the museum, by the way, and it happens to be celadon. And this is Japan right there, divided by the ocean. So Korea is a bit like an upside down thumb, if you'll see it right there. So we are going to hear a story called the tiger's whisker. May I have the next slide, please? Usha, could I have the next slide, please? Yes.
Yes.
Good. Now, if you look at this vase, you see a tiger and you see a magpie. Like in many cultures, certain animals have certain significance. Of course, the tiger is easy to understand. He's strong, but he's also not considered very smart. Oftentimes, the rabbit is the one who dupes him. And then you see a bird. This bird is a magpie. And the magpie is the bearer of good news. And oftentimes, on their wedding kimono, not kimono, on their wedding outfits, they have these symbols, or they might have specific flowers or a pair of cranes who mate for life. So if you notice a little closer, there is something in the tiger's mouth. And if we could go to the next picture, Ushaji, beautiful. And guess what, guys? It's actually a pipe. Now, it's very interesting. In California, smoking has been outlawed in public places. So oftentimes, children have never seen a pipe. But many of you remember the British idea of going for a smoke after dinner, and there would be these pipes. Now, why a pipe? So let's tell you why. Very often we start a story saying, once upon a time, there was a king, Ekta Raja, Ekti Rani. Guess what they say in Korea? Once upon a time, when tigers smoked pipes and rabbits could talk, there lived in a small village a lady by the name of Yon-uk. Yon-uk was very happy going to the fields with her husband, going to the fair. They did everything together. They enjoyed being together. But recently, just after her husband had come back from the war, he was very quiet. He would not talk at all. He would simply stare into the space and sit for hours in the fields doing nothing. Yonuk was at her wit's end. She would prepare the best meals, put it in front of him, and he would just push it aside and say, "I'm not hungry," and walk away huff and puff in anger. And she would be reduced to tears. She would say, I've been so lonely waiting for you to come back from the war so we could do these things together. And now it almost feels like you don't love me anymore. So she worries, what should she do? She remembers there's this wise old woman who lives down in the village, who's a maker of magic potions. So she goes to this lady's house and says, "Oh, wise one, please help me. What do you want?" "I need a love potion." Everybody needs a potion. A love potion, my word. I have no such potion. She says, "You don't understand, O wise one. Ever since my husband has come back, he doesn't talk to me. He doesn't do anything. He just sits and stares into the wild space beyond. He doesn't say a beautiful, soft word to me. When I hug him at night, he pushes me away. It's almost like he doesn't love me anymore." The wise old lady said, "I don't think there's any potions like that, but let me look through my great recipe books. Come back in 3 days." So Yonik comes back in 3 days. And the wise old lady says, I've looked through all my recipes. I did find one. The only issue is it needs a special ingredient. Whatever, I'm happy to give it. It needs a tiger's whisker. A tiger's whisker? How am I ever going to get that? The tiger will probably eat me up before I ever get his whisker. Well, that's not my problem, young lady. When you have it, we'll see about it. Yona goes home that night, and after dinner, she remembers high up in the cave, there is a tiger who lives there. She takes a bowl of meat and rice and walks up the hill and looks into the face of the cave. She doesn't see the tiger, but she places the bowl quite far away from the cave. The next day, she does the same thing. After about a month, she picks up the courage to go a little bit closer. And this time, the tiger appears in the face of the door of the cave. A month later, he's waiting for her when she brings that ball, and she places it in front of him. He thinks nothing of coming and eating it and then lying down next to her for a little nap. She speaks to him in a soft, quiet voice. Generous tiger, brave tiger, I do need something from you. I hope you don't mind. So 6 months go by like this, and this time she takes a small pair of scissors, and as the tiger lays his head near her lap, snip, she quickly gets the whisker. She looks very carefully, the tiger has not moved, and she runs as fast as she can to the lady hermit's house and says, I've got it, I've got it. Here's the whisker. The lady looks at it in the light, feels it, is very impressed, does look real, and tosses it in the fire. Why did you do that? Please, it took me so long to find it. She says, come here, Yana, sit down. Tell me, how did you get this whisker? She says, well, every single day I would go up with this bowl of meat and rice. And I was so patient, I did not shout or worry about how long it took. And I got a little closer each day, so much so that the tiger would come out and eat from my very hands and then lie down and have a little rest with me. So the wise old lady said, my dear Yonok, if with your patience and your love and no judgment, you could tame a tiger, could you not tame and bring your husband's love back? Is he as fierce as the tiger? No. Don't be judgmental. You don't need the whisker anymore to get his love. As Yonok walked back to her home and presented the food to her husband, she did not once complain when he pushed it away. She was patient, and that spring, as the first peony rose up in the fields of her garden, her husband was there with the flower and said, Yonok, let's go to the fair. And that, my dear friends, is the story of the tiger's whisker. And at that time, we ask our students, do you think Yonok was a hero, a female hero, and why? So that's our first version of heroes and sheroes from Korea. Thank you.
What a lovely story, Asha.
Oh, I'm so
Beautifully
glad.
narrated. And I love the word sheroes,
Yes,
not heroine, not a she hero, a shero.
that's correct.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm sure the children enjoy this story when you tell them about the
Yes.
tiger's whiskers. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you.
So, do you want to continue with the second story and I bring the slide back, or would we?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. I just wanted to mention that we asked the children to draw pictures of the stories they've heard and give us feedback. So we normally do 3 stories, and you're going to get a sample of 2 of them with this theme. And I did want to mention that this is across Asia. So I might do Savitri, which I've sent a link to you, and all of your audience is welcome to tap into it. With the absence of time, I thought I would leave that on the link, and it's a story you're all familiar with. But I did want to share with you a story about Japan and the samurais, because a lot of the kids are so much into armor, and it fascinates them. And as they say, pictures and objects speak 1,000 words. So let's look at the samurai. Good. I just wanted to show you Japan. That's the one with the standing Buddha on the right. And Japan, as you know, has been Politically, it's been a problem because they colonized Korea and China, and they're still doing reparations for that. But it's been a very interesting culture. When we went to Hiroshima, for example, they have a peace center after the atomic bomb was dropped on them, which I thought was a travesty. I felt embarrassed to say that I was from America, looking at what devastation that had done. But it's a very interesting story, and after the heroes and sheroes story, I might tell you about the Sparrow Man afterwards. So
Would
there's
love to
Japan.
hear that.
Yes. And the next slide, please. And this, as you can see, is a samurai. We can all relate to the idea of kshatriyas and warriors. As we know, many societies had some sort of hierarchy or a class system. And the samurai, as you know, was very much high up there. So much so, I must tell you that during the Edo period, where they had the floating pleasure gardens, the samurais were not allowed to go there, but the businessmen were. So it's a bit like the Kshatriya idea. So the samurais had a special warrior code. It was called the Bushido. Now, I do want you to look at his armor, and you wouldn't be surprised that we use shin pads still in sports and other plates of armor in many of our sporting events here. So, may I see the next slide, please? Right here, you see a picture, and we'll ask the children to say, well, what do you see? We first wait for them to observe. And they're the ones who make the connections, who will say, oh, I see a fiery person, somebody on fire. Now, if you look closely at this picture, there's a figure in the middle with some kind of a weapon, a sword, and fire at the other end. And it reminds us a lot of maybe Hanuman and Agni. And guess what? You will be pretty close. This is Fudo, the patron saint or the patron god of the samurai. And we're going to hear a story about a samurai who belonged to the school of winning without hands. May I have the next slide, please? Great. Now, what are the tools of the samurai? Of course, you've seen his armor, you've seen his helmet, but he often carries a special sword called a katana. And they often carried two swords, and they were called the two-sword men. Now, what you see on the top is the scabbard or the sheath, and that's the sword right there. And as you know, they were very special astras or weapons and considered to be worthy of worship sometimes. So it's springtime, and this famous samurai, his name is Bokuden. And please remember, people had heard about Bokuden, but they'd never seen him. We didn't have TV or internet at the time. So everybody is headed to the spring festival. But for that, they have to cross Lake Biwa. So Bokuden gently goes into the boat, to the top of the boat. The boat is filling in with fishermen, with people carrying chickens. All kinds of people are coming into the boat. Well, suddenly this big, beefy guy jumps into the boat, walks straight ahead to the bowman and said, everybody's here, let's go. So the boat starts to move. And as the boat is moving, there's a huge wind that rocks the boat. And suddenly, this poor farmer's foot accidentally touches the scabbard of this beefy samurai sword. He is so angry and says, you oaf, you dirty old man, how dare you touch my sword? The poor farmer says, oh, high-placed one, please, please, I'm so sorry. But I didn't mean it. It's an accident. The boat was rocking and my foot accidentally touched it. Oh, yeah, he will see about that when you don't have a foot. And he draws his sword. Suddenly, he feels a hand coming to the back of the sword. He looks up and there's this old man, Bokuden, looking down at him. And he says, get out of the way. This is between me and him. I'm a samurai and I'll settle it my way. And Bokuden quietly says, I'm also a samurai. And I wouldn't do anything I would regret later. That you would do something against Bushido, the code of warriors. He says, oh, yeah, you're going to tell me about Bushido? Why don't we settle it together? So Bokuden points to a little sandbar and tells the boatman, I think we will settle between samurais rather than this poor little man and see what happens. And this big beefy samurai says, oh, yes? Well, what do you know? I belong to the Matsukareu, the Invincibles. I can teach you a lesson about samurai and swords. And Bokuden quietly says, well, young man, I belong to the school of winning without hands. Why don't we go to the sandbar and settle the problem? I do believe the farmer was correct. It was an accident. So as they approached the sandbar, this big, beefy samurai jumps off the boat, lands on the sandbar, and guess what Bokuden does? He takes the pole from the boatman, pushes the boat away, and says, come on, folks, we have a fair to attend. And everybody stares up at him. And this poor farmer says, thank you, sir, for saving my life. What is your good name? And he says, Bokuden. There's a hush on the group because they know that if Bokuden had drawn his sword, that big, beefy samurai's head would be lying on the ground today. And even today, if you go to Japan, there's a famous shrine to Bokuden and his ability to resolve a problem from the school called Winning Without Hands. And at that point, we asked the children, have you ever had a situation that you've resolved on the playground or somebody's bullying you without pushing or hitting? And it's amazing how easy it is for the children to extrapolate the lessons of these stories and still be fascinated by all this warrior and fighting stuff. Very much like Hanuman is always a wonderful hero. We had a great exhibition on the Ramayana, and we had our little grandson with us. And guess what he said? He says, I want a Hanuman themed party. I want to dress up like one and run around. So it's interesting. Heroes and sheroes are an archetype of every culture. And I so love the story and I love to tell it. Thank you.
Asha, I was like a kid. I enjoyed this story, winning without hands, right? And what a wonderful lesson about non-violence.
That's
You
correct.
know, not using your hands. And this is something that you could do with teenagers as well, anger
Absolutely.
management. So
Yes.
this is a wonderful story. I work with senior students in schools, and we do topics like bullying and anger management and diversity appreciation. I think this is a wonderful story.
Yes.
uh,
Yes. Yes. It's
Winning without
very-
hands.
I'm happy to
Thank
share
you.
it with you. I'll send it to you.
Yes, I'm really happy to have heard this story.
I'm so
And this is what happens, you learn so much from the storytellers that come onto
yes.
our show on Storytellers Cafe, that some stories are unheard. As you were talking about the sandbank, it reminded me of a Flemish folk tale, The Lady of Staveren,
Yes.
which I actually told in the museum
Is
when the
that right?
Flemish masterpieces were
Yes.
showcased at the Prince of Wales Museum in
Oh,
Mumbai.
how
And
interesting.
your work, the docents' work at the San Francisco, the Asian Art Museum, has kind of inspired me at Mumbai Storytellers Society to collaborate with the museum and
Very
bring the
good.
museum alive.
Yes.
So we
Yes.
did a summer session for
Lovely.
5 weeks. And see, this is what happens when there is an exchange of ideas and you meet
Absolutely.
people. You want to emulate the same in your city
Exactly.
and
Yes. Yes.
country. And
And
we
what's so
hope,
wonderful, Ushaji, is that when you bring kids from all kinds of backgrounds, we have what we call the START program. So these are, underprivileged kids who are on a school lunch program, etc. And literally, their parents have never entered a museum. And that's what happens in Bombay so often. I
Yes.
was at that museum recently. It's now Chhatrapati Shivaji Museum. That used to
Yeah.
be my stomping ground. On Saturday afternoons, we would go to the Jahangir Art Gallery, go to Samovar, go to Kalaba and have Pani Puri at Kailash Parbat, catch the latest Hollywood movie because it was there only for a week. So you brought back memories of those days. But I think
Yeah.
the museum program is a great idea because you see, the objects do the talking. And it's such a great
Absolutely.
way to to make them, to channel the story. I'm so glad you're looking at that. And we
No,
have a
wonderful.
wonderful education department that coordinates with the schools, and happy to put you in touch with them. We actually, during COVID, did 15,000 virtual tours. And my
Wow.
best tour just recently was a school in Philadelphia, which we would not have done except for Zoom.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's a really good program.
Yes, because our museum also has an education department and a children's museum, which was just set up, inaugurated 2 years back.
Is that
So,
right?
I mean, the lady or the person who's heading this educational program is a
Yes.
good friend, and she was very open when I suggested this collaboration with
Great idea.
storytellers in Bombay. So
Wonderful.
it's wonderful. I mean, there is lots that one can do, and usually people think museums are boring. They are just objects lying there. What would I do? And this is because I have never visited a museum when I was young, to be very
Yes.
honest.
Yes.
You see, and but now I realize that the museum have, I mean, they have so much information.
That's
There's
right.
so many stories that are
Yes.
waiting to be told.
Right.
So,
Right.
working in museums as a storyteller has opened my eyes, and I feel today children are blessed to have all these
Resources.
facilities.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
resources.
A lot of the artifacts are in our temples. To be very honest, this carries through in America, like the Asian Art Museum. The main population that comes is the Westerners. We do not get that many Indians. We're really trying to get people to come. And that means having them participate, having them be part of a storyteller program. And I would say to all your audience in Cincinnati, Arizona, please go to your local museum. And if there's a small Asia section, you'll find it's usually China and the Orient. And we forget, we are the ones who exported Buddhism to these countries. In China and our cultures have so many commonalities. We've got to learn from each other, live with each other. But you have to do the work. You have to be part of the solution rather than sit back and say, oh, why don't we have enough space? Well, make that space yourself. Put in the work. And if anyone has any questions about the school programs, and I know there are quite a few teachers who are in the audience, please feel free to email me. I have no problem, Ushaji. You can send my email to them.
Yeah, I
And then
was
we
just
can
coming
go.
to that, Asha.
Yes.
This is to all the listeners and viewers of Storytellers Cafe that Asha Bajaj can be contacted. I will be sharing her email with you, and also the Asian Art Museum that she's doing. And if you're watching this from the United States, from the beautiful city of Ohio, I mean, Cincinnati in Ohio, Chicago, or Phoenix,
Phoenix.
you can always get in touch with Asha, and I'm sure she'll bring the museum home to your city. She'll bring it to your home. So I think you should use the resources that we put out on Storytellers Cafe. I always tell the listeners, don't feel shy when this show is aired on the 15th of August. Please do put in your comments and ask questions. And even if Asha is not watching it being streamed live at 9 p.m. Indian time, because it's going to be early morning for her, but she will always go back to the comments and answer it, or I'll try and answer that. So I would suggest, don't be shy, come with your questions and do contact Asha Bajaj.
Sure, anytime.
Wonderful, Asha. It was so
Thank you.
lovely that, like, I just wanted to go on. This is the first time I haven't even looked at the time and it says 50 minutes, but I feel no. The stories are so interesting, captivates your heart, and you just don't want it to end. You want to stay in that storyland. I will also put the link to Savitri, the
Okay.
famous Savitri Satyavan
Story.
story, which is exported to the West. Everyone knows about Savitri. So you can definitely go and listen to Asha telling that story. And Asha, tell us, you already mentioned that in the pandemic, you have, catered to so many schools around the United States. And how has the virtual experience been as a storyteller for you?
Well, the technology is an issue. So, for example, I'm in the middle of the sword being there, and my connection is gone. So, I have to take a minute to get my phone, another device to get Zoom on. But, kids are flexible, they are adaptable. You just go with the flow and keep telling the story. And we normally have two storytellers. So, if one drops off the radar, the other one can get take over. And we always have the support of the ed department, so they're the ones who are liaisoning, with they're our liaison with the school teachers, and it's great. It becomes such a participative forum, and then because of the Zoom, there's interaction. So, for example, I have had kids say, "Why did Rama go to the forest?" I mean, they saw the patent unfairness of Kaikai's request. It's amazing, the stories that come up, or and they'll always ask you, is it real? So you have to say it's just as real as Superman being able to fly. It's your imagination, and what was once in our imagination, we are finding through quantum physics and neuroscience, is true today. We are hearing about universes outside. So I wanted to tell you, Shuji, that I love reading a variety of genres, and I'm reading Stephen Hawking right now. And it's amazing how quantum physics is similar to some of our philosophical ideas of being,
Absolutely.
so science and arts are not separate. And
No.
we just saw a Japanese artist featured at the museum who draws the DNA like a labyrinth, and it's amazing. And he's writing Om Mani Padme Hum in the spiral. It's it, you
Mhm.
know, you. I don't think this whole concept of left versus right, rational versus traditional. There is so much syncretism, and I think coming from India, that gives us this fluidity for our
Yes.
minds, plasticity, to entertain two concepts at the same time, that you can be soft as Sita or strong as Durga at the same time. So
Yes.
it's been a great experience, and I
Yes.
wanted to wish everybody. I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
I just wanted to wish everyone again a very happy Independence Day, and to remember the things, as they say, they can take an Indian out of India, but they can't take the Indian out of you. So retain what's good, take away what's not that good, and be open to new influences if they make sense for you. That's what I would say. Jai Hind.
Yeah. I wanted to come in before you said Jai Hind, because when you were talking about the realities, alternate realities, and alternate universe, I believe in that time travel. And I was just watching a movie yesterday on Netflix, which has just come, a movie from southern India,
Okay.
where the scientist
Ah,
can go into the past and
yes.
erase the present.
Ah,
You see, and he has developed a machine or a
yes.
formula and then comes back. So, it is so interesting because all that is possible.
Yes.
We've done that, where,
Yes.
because through your yogic powers, you can just time travel into the future and land yourself in the present and live with the humanity that's today. So, stories from our Puranas talk about that. So, it's nothing new. And it's so
Well, it's
wonderful.
still new. It's still new. So, in fact,
Yeah,
Ushaji, as we were talking, we had a movie here a couple of years ago called Back to the Future.
yeah.
So, if you remember that movie, this young man in the present is now dating his mother. So, it's really interesting. So I think the reason that these stories were there, because our human mind is bound by time and space, and we have archetypes. Every culture has the archetype of a superior power or something we can't explain. But there is something called the God particle, and it's so
Yeah.
interesting. So anyway, we could go on and on about that,
I
and that's for
know.
another time.
Yeah, we could have another session on this, and I'm sure the listeners are equally interested. Asha, I before we sign off, I just wanted to know that you mentioned about a rigorous training. So, just because there are a lot of storytellers who watch Storytellers Cafe, some of them are budding, even experienced tellers like me would like to know what is that you did tell about style and form of storytelling, the training. Can you just give us in brief detail as to what the training entailed?
Right. So this was a 1 year commitment. And, even if you're a volunteer here, it's like a professional commitment. You have to show up to class, you have to be on time. And so they took each area. So, for example, if we are doing Japanese folk tales, they gave us a big book like that. And it included Japanese culture, activities for the school teacher or for us to do, like painting and things like that, a little bit about the history and about common beliefs. You've got to understand that. So when the children come, and I didn't do that with your audience simply because I forgot. So, for example, if you're coming to Korea, I would say, well, how do you say hello? And you'll say, Annyeong haseyo. And if you're in Japan, you will say konnichiwa or domo. And to start the story, you will say mukashe, mukashe. And when you're signing off in Japan, you would say arigato. And in Korea, you will say kamsa hamnida. It's so interesting. But all these cultures share a lot of things with India. And I think we were fortunate that doing Asia, we already had sort of the basic ideas. Like in Korea, if you're seated at a table, nobody will start eating until the eldest person in the group puts the first morsel in their mouth. But I have to tell you, that culture was a disservice to them when they had a crash at the Korean Airlines, because the second person in command did not feel strong and agency enough to tell the captain that they were running into problems. So you see, it's very interesting to understand that when you are telling the story, the context matters. So, when somebody's saying, why did Rama do that? That's when you have to tell them that was Satyuga. Gurukul Reet Sadachaliyai, Jana Jai, Badavachananai. And they can understand that. You have to, honor your word, a gentleman's word. So the training involved each module for each culture. And I have to tell you, I was really happy to have the opportunity to do it for the next group on basic beliefs of Hinduism. So, as I was telling you, Shaji, it's not really a story of Rama and Sita, the characters. It's really a story about karma, about dharma, and why does it matter that Dashratha lies alone, bereft of his son? Because in the belief system, he will be denied moksha if his son does not perform the rites. It's a belief system. So it's the same issue whether you say, an angel pollinated Mother Mary and a child was born. We all make these leaps of faith. So I think understanding and respecting it, having context is important. So when you do China, we go to the money tree, for example, and you see the figure in the middle and, explaining. For example, I'm wearing a jade bracelet because jade is such a popular It's almost like gold has the significance for India. Jade has the significance for this culture. In fact, one of our best figurines is in jade of Buddha, totally emaciated when he has fasted and done what the sadhus have asked them. And he realizes that his answer is not there yet. And it's so amazing because the jade is able to get all these craggy lines. It's just an amazing artifact. And we have the
Oh,
best
beautiful.
collection of jade. So, it's making your hair stand up just
I
listening to
know,
it.
absolutely. I mean, I just don't want the evening to end.
I know.
But
So it's
Asha
a
ji,
rigorous program. Yes. So,
yeah, we will have you again
oh,
because,
thank you.
last time was a two-part series. And, I just discovered that as I talk to storytellers, one session doesn't do justice to the experience, and especially in your case, with an illustrious career as a physical therapist and turned into a storyteller, which is also a therapy of a different kind, more of a mental therapy. So it's a beautiful way that you blended your two art together, arts, and then, come out. And we are really honored to have you today on this special Independence Day session on Storytellers Cafe. And I request all the listeners to please post your comments. Let us know from which city, which country you're watching, and you will get Ashaji's Gmail email that you can connect with her, and don't feel shy in inviting her and the Asian Arts Museum into your homes. I have one just last question. This is my personal curiosity. Is there an Asian Arts Museum in other cities in the United States, like New York,
Yes, in
Washington?
fact, the Sackler Gallery in Washington, D.C., actually has a wonderful display of a puja. So every museum that you go to has a section, because don't forget, India was the motherlode of Indus civilization, from the Harappa. And it's so funny, now you go, we have a stele in our museum, and now it says Pakistan on it, because that's the
Okay.
region right now. It's so, Mohenjo-daro
No.
now is in
Do you
Pakistan.
have an Asian Arts Museum in New York? Like you have the Met and you have
Yes.
Guggenheim.
No, I think I don't think there's a specific one. And the reason is our history. As I mentioned to you, we are very close to the Pacific. In fact, Hawaii almost became a Japanese state before it was
Absolutely.
voted to come to America. And we have the largest Chinese population outside of China. They were brought to bring, do the railroads here as this area developed. I mean, there's a lot of history that
Right.
allows us to have a specific. And I did want to mention, Ushaji, that our museum is organized around the birth of Buddha. So we ask people to start at the third floor. So that's India, South Asia. And I hated they call us South Asia. I mean, why not say India? But then you'll offend the Pakistanis and the Sri Lankans and what have you. So it's not politically correct to say India anymore. So we're South Asia. Then we have Southeast Asia. And then as Buddhism spread to Thailand, to Burma, to Japan, to China, we have two galleries for China. And so it follows the journey of Buddha and his message. And one of the best stories we tell is the story of how a prince became the Buddha. And I'll be very honest, I have, as I've grown older, become very much partial to Buddhist practices, and I still do Vipassana meditation every day. And we have a meditation alcove where we bring the children and they all sit down. And for 2 minutes, we have them close their eyes to mimic the statue of Buddha. And there's a little fountain there. It's an infinity fountain. So you can't see where the water is going down. And it's amazing that after we do that, it carries through the tour. You don't have people running around and some child going into a corner. The ultimate frontier is the mind, and managing the mind is what India, Buddhism has taught us. And I think that is the last frontier. And it's so nice to be able to share some of those ideas.
Beautiful. Mark your calendars, ladies and gentlemen. I'm bringing Asha
Oh,
Bajaj in
jeez.
October for during Gandhiji's birthday, during the
Oh,
Joy of Giving week, because I don't know about you, but I want to listen more to her stories.
thank you.
Thank you, Asha.
Oh, my
Time is not
pleasure.
time is running away, and but I've enjoyed the session, and I'm sure our listeners have also equally enjoyed listening to your stories. And you have
My pleasure.
such experience, and it's wonderful and a beautiful way of expressing. A storyteller's tools are words. How you express yourself, that's what distinguishes you from an average storyteller to a master storyteller.
Oh, I
I
don't know
don't know
about
what that means, but I know that a master storyteller is anyone who can express beautifully and communicate the idea and the emotion to the listeners.
Thank you.
So thank you, Asha.
My
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
Cute. I just enjoy sharing the joy I get. So I have to tell you, Ushaji, one day I was doing a tour and this lady kept following us. And when I came down, I thought she's one of the teachers or a chaperone. And I said, how did you enjoy the tour? She says, I enjoyed listening to you so much that I wanted to keep listening to you. So I said, that's when I should use my voice in a creative manner and hopefully be of some service to the community here. Thank you for the honor and Jai Hind and happy Independence Day. Thank you.
Jai Hind, Asha ji. And listeners, thank you for listening to this special edition on Storytellers Cafe. Our guest tonight was Asha Bajaj from the beautiful city of San Francisco, United States. And keep listening to Storytellers Cafe as we bring in other storytellers in the upcoming weeks with the festival season starting. So we have lots in store for you. So stay tuned and namaste and Jai Hind. I have to play the jingle, Asha ji, and that's how we close our session.
Thank you.
So goodbye and good night. Good morning to you.
Thank you.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.